NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, 60% of American adults say our nation judges people by character, not the color of their skin. When you break it down by race, 62% of whites and Hispanics, 57% agree, but only 40% of African Americans agree that our nation is colorblind. And yesterday, the president spoke at a church answering critics who say he's not lived up to expectations some had for this nation's first African American president.
There are times when the barbs sting. There are times when it feels like all these efforts are for naught. And change is so painfully slow in coming, and I have to confront my own doubts. But let me tell you, during those times, it's faith that keeps me calm.
Boyce Watkins is a professor at Syracuse University and a contributor to Griot.com, and he posed a big question today. Would Martin Luther King support Obama's policies? Thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
So that is a heavy question, but it is a very important one. But let me start off with the emotion we saw from President Obama yesterday, even expressing his own doubts about living up to expectations, not just by African Americans, but by this country.
Well, I think that the president, his emotional disposition, I think, reflects the fact that he's very genuine about his desire to serve the country effectively. I think he also cares about the African American community. At the same time, I think that Dr. King, were he here to applaud the president like the rest of us, I think he would have cried at his inauguration like a lot of people did. But at the same time, I think that he would challenge the president, as he would any political leader, to ensure that the interests of his community were being respected effectively. So I think that when you talk about Barack Obama's position as it pertains to the African American community, there are legitimate concerns that people have raised about issues such as the huge black unemployment gap that really, to some extent, has been ignored by the administration, the wealth gap, and some other issues that affect black men. So I think Dr. King would respect the president, as I do, but he would also make sure that the president was held to task on important issues in our country.
In your piece on Griot.com, you say that these men might have been, quote, frenemies. What do you mean by that?
Well, I was being silly. I was using the language of my teenage daughters. But effectively, that term would be accurate in the sense that Dr. King would have a great relationship with the president if he were alive today, the same as he did with John F. Kennedy. But at the same time, he would understand that President Obama is in the very uncomfortable position of having to defend a machine of war, a machine of capitalism, and sometimes a machine of corruption called the United States government. It doesn't mean that our government's bad, though, because at the same time, Dr. King would celebrate the freedoms that are protected by this machine. He would also applaud the fact that America has shown enough compassion and enough intelligence to elect the best man for the job, and hopefully one day we'll elect the best woman for the job. So long story short, I think Dr. King would shake Obama's hand, he would congratulate him, and then he would say, here's a list of issues for the voiceless in America, right, and I expect you to respect those issues.
Two big points you point out that these men certainly would differ in your opinion. The war, you said that King would balk at the audacity of President Obama to accept the Nobel Prize, and that he would not be pleased by the requirement to have health insurance coverage as it stands right now, and what we're looking at is possible reform.
Yes, I can't speak for Dr. King, and we've discussed this a lot in our national conversation on race, which is at theconversationonrace.com. And effectively, what we've been discussing is the fact that while King would support Obama's decision to expand health care coverage to the poor, he would also wonder why it is the case that all Americans have to buy health care insurance, why companies like AIG have their stock price has absolutely risen through the roof as a result of the health care plan. And that's primarily because President Obama has to defend capitalist interests that don't always care about the people who don't have a voice. At the same time, when you talk about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think Dr. King would not support these wars, but President Obama didn't support these wars either. He voted against them. And then the idea that Obama was sort of pushed into this awkward position to have to accept a Nobel Peace Prize while defending the war, I don't think that's Obama's fault, but I think that will probably disturb Dr. King.
Well, Professor Watkins, incredible piece that you've got there on Griot.com. Thanks for joining us to explain it. And tonight at 10 p.m., be sure to tune in to MSNBC for our special coverage. It's a 2-hour primetime event, Obama's America 2010 and beyond.